Good day, everybody. Welcome to another DVT Insights session. These sessions are conducted on a regular basis where we take a look at technologies and we bring in experts in the field to share a bit with you in terms of how you might use that technology and how you might benefit from that. Today, we are sharing with you one of our internal experts in Anton Keyter. Anton is a delivery manager and leads a number of engagements for us at DVT. And his task over the last 6 months or so has really been how to deploy AI into our own organization and gain benefits from that in efficiency, either as assistants or as agents in terms of where it might be used effectively. And it seems that we're right at that point now where it's time to share some of that expertise with all of you. So today we welcome Anton joining us to actually talk to you about how to craft tailored AI assistance for real-world applications. Anton, thank you so much for making the time available today to come and talk to our audience.
Thank you very much, Carl, for that introduction. Yeah, I always said if this was a Disney introduction, I would have makeup and a parade, but thank you so much, Carl. Okay, let's jump right in. So if we look at AI assistants, we usually think, why do we have to add on to the normal chat that we use with ChatGPT or any other generative AI tool? And the answer is usually fivefold if you look at the reasons why we have to look at AI assistants. So first of all, AI assistants help you to keep your data more secure. So you have a project or some task that you're working on. You want to make sure that the data isn't absorbed into the general cloud, and you want to make sure that your data is kept secure. So that's one of the key reasons why you want to do it. So assistant is also in the context of, you will have noticed if you have conversations with AI, you would have noticed that you generally go on and on and on in the discussion, and sometimes those discussions get very long and you lose context sometimes and it forgets what it said previously. So it could help you also to be very focused on certain content that you add, and there's actually no limits to the application. An assistant can do so much more for you. So how are we going to do this? We're going to use a feature in ChatGPT from the company called OpenAI. I suppose you've heard of that before. So it's a feature that you get with the paid version of ChatGPT, where you can construct your own GPT or your own assistants. We'll go into that a bit later. We can also use this assistant to be tool aware, to be aware of the outside world and make sure when certain content is created. So it makes it very easy for you to create content for other tools outside the assistant. And then a big thing about AI assistants is obviously collaboration within teams. You know, the delivery space I am from is a key part of what we do, and managing the interaction with the team and making sure the data is secure within that team. Okay, let's jump right in. There's just something we have to highlight, and that is, if you look at where we are with AI at this stage, is that there's a real gap between free AI and paid AI. And this little image, I thought, clearly demonstrate that gap for us. And although we would like to side with the underdog, usually we have to note that the leaps and bounds we've gained in the past year only, or a bit more, with commercial AI systems has really driven even the open source side of it. So if you want to build an AI assistant in this space, we usually use the paid models. Although it requires a bit more experience and insight, if you want to look at the coding part of it and want to integrate with AI from a programming perspective, but we are going to focus on the very practical, non-code way of creating an AI assistant. So today it's not intended to be complicated, or you don't need programming experience. If you can instruct somebody to have a task, you can literally look at an AI assistant on ChatGPT. So open source, generally we think of smaller models, less hardware, and moving faster and things like that. But in this case, we will dive into the ChatGPT assistant feature more in detail. Okay, so let's jump right in. So if we look at an example of how to implement it, I thought to make a use case or a use case that's very relatable, and you could relate it to any project. You can relate it not necessarily to a project, but maybe to a design. If you're looking at a design, you can relate it to, say, if you're really into the technical side of things, you can go into research. But I think what we're trying to demonstrate here is the helpfulness of an AI assistant is how to create the context for the AI assistant. So in this example, we're going to look at the Coffee Bean project, and it will support a Scrum team, a project team, and they want to develop a phone app. So the purpose, always need to clearly define your goals and what your value is for the assistant. And we're going to do this in plain text. It's very easy to apply. You instruct the assistant in plain text. You'll go into your ChatGPT, a paid account, and you will define a assistant in the MyGPT space. Okay, then the next thing you need to be very aware of is your data. So this data can be in any form. It can be a text document. It can be a PowerPoint presentation like this. It can be an Excel document, or it can take different forms, and you can even look at images if you want to attach images. So it makes it really practical for you to focus on what your intent is with the assistant. And then obviously, if you look at attention, our attention for the assistant needs to be very clearly defined, and the attention is basically used to say what data we need to look at first. So obviously you have to do with AI here. There's a huge genetic understanding of the world out there by AI, but this assistant, you need to make sure that it stay focused and that it prioritize and access to your content and be aware of your content specifically. Otherwise, it will just go out and use generic information. And then a big part of what the assistant does is insights. You want the assistant to process things on a certain level and look at what insights you can glean from your data. Maybe you want specific reports. Maybe you are looking at relating it to some research, or maybe you just want an ad campaign and you want it to show you insights, because creativity is a big part of this. We've seen how AI has changed our lives, giving us ideas or maybe brainstorming with us. But the insights part is a crucial part for the assistant to make sure it relates to your data. Okay, then finally, we're going to look at the output. So how do you want to output this? You can be very specific. You can make it it's appealing, or it's very professional, and you can really tailor this so it helps you, so you don't get these long-winded responses sometimes from AI. So you can really hone in on the detail and make sure you get what you want. And then we're going to have a part two. So we're going to do this. We're going to create an AI assistant. We're going to have a part two. And then we're going to look at how to interface with external tools. How can your assistant really connect with your external tools and not only stay within a text-based environment, but really make it very practical for you, and how to apply the output specifically. So we're going to jump right in.
Anton, if I can just interrupt for a moment, just back to that prior slide. And sorry, just for our audience, if you do have questions along the way for Anton, there is a Q&A function in our session. Just raise your questions there. I will moderate those questions and bring them back to Anton, either as we're going through sections or at the end when we run a Q&A session on it. Anton, sorry, I just wanted to ask you, so in the context of what you've presented here, effectively you're using the LLM type technology in the background on ChatGPT. And for, say, a project team, you're creating an agent or a bot that's basically going to work with them and has particular contextual knowledge that it then responds with. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. And we are creating the framework. This is a very generic framework on how to coach your bot or your assistant. So it makes it very easy to understand, and you can apply this type of framework to any assistant that you want to create.
I think that this section that you've got here is really important because I know for a lot, perhaps just for myself, that haven't been through this process, really addressing not just the conversational interaction in creating it, but being conscious of the need to set purpose, be aware of the data, bring attention of the bot to particular things. Those are really important steps, I imagine, in creating a successful bot or assistant that will come out of the process, yeah?
Yes, correct. Especially those three first steps. If you don't do the other steps and you focus only on those three, you can already have a basic assistant, but these are very important. And you'll notice the process of creating the assistant from ChatGPT also guides you in this direction.
Great. Well, I imagine that's going to take the form of sort of a bit of prompt engineering that you're going to be showing us now, yeah?
Yes, correct. So let's jump in. Exactly. We're going to keep it simple. It's easy to process, and really anybody can do it. If you work with AI before, ChatGPT before, you can do it. So let's jump right in. If you have a paid account, you will notice that there's a feature called My GPT, and here you can see I am really transparent here. So please excuse all these assistants. I've played with this on the delivery space, and we have created a couple of assistants here already. So we've played around quite a bit and really used it for professional use as well. So let's jump right in. You'll notice the link at the top there that I mentioned. It's chatgpt.com/gpt/mine. So just for your note, that is the link specifically on a paid GPT that you can have a look. Okay, so we will click on create a GPT, and with that, it'll ask us what you want to do. And this is the guided exercise. And you'll notice I very plainly say that's an assistant for the Coffee Bean project through initiation, discovery, execution, and launch phases. And that's the engagement part that we said we're going to define the purpose. You'll notice this is step number one. We define the purpose. So it's going to come back and say, oh, what would you like this assistant to be called? Well, that's fine. Let's call it the Coffee Bean Assistant. And it will say, okay, it's going to rename it to that. And at the top, you'll see there, the name will change to Coffee Bean Assistant. And now it's going to ask you for an image. So it will create a nice little icon for you. I think it just adds a bit to the flavor of the personal interaction. And I will say, okay, this is maybe it's not a perfect image, but you can edit it and you can ask it to change things like that. And you'll notice it updated that for us. Okay, and just for a and you can see it's also asking you, what do we want to do next? So it is really coaching you in that. So let's ask it, what is the purpose of this assistant? Just to see on the right-hand side, you have a testing pane. And on the right-hand side, you can really test the assistant. And this is the first question we asked. The purpose of this assistant named Coffee Bean Assistant is to support the Coffee Bean project team in development of a phone app aimed at selling coffee products. So there you can see on the right-hand side, clearly this is how it would be used. On the left-hand side, this is how we instruct the assistant. So this is the common theme that you'll see across creating the assessment. You'll see two tabs here. The create part is a bit more conversational, and the configure part is obviously a bit more technical, where you have a couple of settings if you want to change the settings. But that is how you define the purpose for this assistant. So we'll jump to the next part, and now we're going to look at the data. So this gets very interesting. If you create the data, sometimes we do not realize what we can add as data. And you'll see that I've used data like project management concepts and agile concepts and the Scrum guide. These are standard principles that it does have in its general knowledge. But I want this assistant to be really focused on agile. And I want this assistant to understand DVT and what DVT is about. So let's jump right in. And you'll notice we're going to add the data. Just on the prompt itself, you drop the files there. You notice I dropped the Scrum guide, and you can add any of your information there. And I've dropped the Scaled Agile framework, and it will upload the document as well. And you can add your project specific documents or your any other specific documents for any if it's on individuals. There I've added the business analysis standards guide as well, version 3. And if you say, okay, but what about copyright and things? Obviously, if you have those files, just make sure that you're not doing illegal things. And this is a special one. You'll see the last one say DVT software company website content. I just grabbed the whole DVT software content text and I put it in a file, and that's the extent of things you can actually do. So you can add a lot more. And now I'm going to say, okay, prioritize this information for me. So make sure this is added, and you're going to see it's going to say updating the GPT. So it means it's making that knowledge base part of its, can I say, short-term memory, in the sense of it will always refer to that first. So it will only after that delve into the more general information.
So
Okay,
Anton, a question that occurs to me at this point. So
sure.
Effectively, you're establishing the knowledge base there for this assistant by putting that content in. What is the effect when you tell the assistant to prioritize that? Is it also able to go out to the net and basically pull on other content? Or are you able to restrict it in this way, or at least go heavily weight this knowledge that I give you versus other knowledge you may have?
So, Carl, literally all of the above.
Okay.
I have another method that I use that I can share. You can indirectly refer to books or documentation that you think is general knowledge. Like the Scrum Guide is actually general knowledge, but I would like to prioritize the Scrum Guide more. And I can say, disregard any knowledge you have about Scrum, only use the Scrum Guide. I can really be very specific. So you could make your instructions very tailored to what you prefer, or you can make it very indirect or general to say, I like this book, From Good to Great by J.P. Collins, or Great Habits, or things like that, and you can make it part of the thinking of this assistant. So there's actually quite a few ways you can prioritize data and make sure it focuses, or do it more generic. You can change that level of focus.
Great.
So on the right-hand side, you can see again, we've tested the assistant now, and you'll notice it's been updated here, and we ask it, list the attached resources for the assistant, and now it's going to list it, use the Scrum Guide, and it gives you a little summary. It goes into the documents, safe, BABOK, and DVT software content. It's for specific dates. So just to stop you a little bit, you can add content, up-to-date content as you wish. So you can go and remove this in the Configure tab at the top. You can remove the data. I'll show you a bit later how that works. You can remove the data, and you can add new data, and it will update that. It will keep that up to date. Okay.
And so that can be in various formats, right? So you've added in PDF documents here. Does it need to be textually based, or could it be something like a spreadsheet and data and statistics in a tabular format, something like that?
Yes, absolutely right, Carl. This can be in a Word document. It can be in an Excel spreadsheet. It even can be images. ChatGPT understands images as well. So you are allowed to use different varied formats. But let's jump into the next part. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the more insightful part of the assistant, setting the attention, making sure it provides insightful responses, and making sure the output is humanized. What I mean by humanized is just that don't make it always sound like an AI has done it. We're not trying to hide that we're using AI, but we don't want it to sound AI or synthetic like all the time. Okay, let's jump right in. So we're going to go through the process and say specifically on how to construct the attention when responding to user questions. Always prioritize the provided data. So again, we say focus on the data. It's what you said, Carl. We're going to put the attention on the data, and it must stay focused without unnecessary warnings, introductions, or conclusions. And it's going to say, okay, great, I've updated that. And now on the right-hand pane, you can see the assistant is updated. And we're going to move to the next part, the insight part. So this is important. What is insight? You wanted to provide clear insights from the context of this assistant. You want to also make sure it raises any concerns, and don't be agreeable. This is a big point. Don't be agreeable. I've seen AI hallucinate sometimes. So hallucination is a standard term used in the generative AI assistant world, and it just means it lies. So you always have to check the output, and we know that's the case. But if you say don't always be agreeable, it's just that small parameter that you adjust, that it say, okay, I'm not going to always agree with you. I'm going to push back a little bit. And you expect that from an assistant, you know? In the space that DVT work, our clients expect us to push back a little bit and give insightful suggestions, and we want our AI to do the same. And here we're going to go. The last part is deliver insightful and clear output in easy to understand English, and format it a bit if you want, and make sure you keep the responses to the point. And now, just as a final test, we're going to say, state the purpose of this assistant. And you're going to notice now it's a bit more meaty. The response has got a bit more content, although it's the same question we asked previously. You'll notice here the second part, it added now the assistant focuses on delivering concise, actionable insight, maintaining a detailed record of risk and issues, providing constructive feedback. So you can see it incorporated our insight request into what this assistant needs to be. Okay, so let's do a small test. Let's run a small test, and there's no questions. We can jump into that. So this part is saving it. So you can see here, you can share it with your colleagues on invite, or specifically in the team. It should be noted that you can have a paid version inside a team as well. And this will update that and make sure you only share your data within your team or within the broader audience. It takes a bit more understanding of when you create an account to make sure it's part of a team. So just be aware of that, although I'm not showing it in this demonstration. Okay, now we're going to do a full screen. You say View GPT. This is what it will look like to your team. And let's ask it, you know, what is our first steps for this project? And it will tell us what's the first steps. And it will go into Agile, Scrum principles, and it will tell us these are the first steps that we need to apply. And now it will do that for us. So sprint planning, the standard things that a good Scrum Master would know already, but it's really good for the demonstration to see these are actually 2 steps. Now you can ask me, Anton, but generally it would help me with stuff like this as well if it's normal AI. Yes, but in this case, we asked it to focus specifically on SAFe and how the Scrum Guide is applied, and it will do that for us. Okay, now, if there's no questions on the first part, Carl, are we doing okay? No Q&As that I can address yet?
Yeah, we're good, Anton. I've probably got a stack of questions, but I'll be patient.
Okay, I'm ready for you, Carl. Thank you so much. Now we're going into the second part. Now this is where it gets interesting. The first part is that people are generally aware of, okay, this is AI, and this is a very basic functionality, but now we're getting into the extra functionality. So now we're getting into interesting things. We're going to look at reporting, extending the assistant, creating different reports and status reports, and yeah, using up-to-date data and making sure everybody, when they ask what's the status of the project, they will get it back, and you can do the same thing. You can do up-to-date data. We're going to tell it how to create documents. So we all know that you can't ask an AI, you know, create a document for me and it spits out the document. You have to go about it in a structured way, and we're going to tell this assistant how to do it in a structured way. And then we have an interesting rabbit trail here that's very useful for people that want to execute projects, or you want to envisage what your ideas, and we're going to tell the assistant how to create flowcharts and diagrams for us. And lastly, we're going to show you how to export data into Excel. Now, the question we usually have is, can't it just create a file for us? We just want a file and we want to open the file. So yes, an assistant can do that, but this is where you need a bit of extra knowledge and extra support and understanding of our assistant. We'll get to that a bit later. In the end, I'll show you the next level of where we can go with this. But for now, we're trying to keep this simple or very generic for anybody to be able to do this. So we're just going to copy and paste on the document side. Okay, so let's jump in on reporting. So reporting has got an interesting dimension to it. And you can see we are editing our assistant, so that has been saved properly. And reporting, you can do this very easily, preferably adding data. And we've got a way how reports are read. You'll see there's two parts, how to record the latest status, and you'll see there I refer to attached status, and we'll also tell the assistant how to output when creating a status to focus on risks and typical things that you would expect from a report. And we're going to put this in a file. So you can see this is a Word document. We're adding the report status. So this is a document that you can maintain and just give to the assistant, and everybody will be updated when they use this assistant and ask for the status. It's very simplified at this stage, but you can really go quite a far way if your document is up to date. This document doesn't need to be that detailed, but obviously contain the basic things. So now it will show us, I created sort of fictitious dates, progress, and updates. So I've added some risks about hardware. I've added the milestones that way. You can see it's got a bit of a timeline there. And then I've got a bit of budget there, US dollars budget there at the end, just to make that a bit more realistic. And you'll see there's the hardware compatibility and the cost risk, and there's the budget that we say. And now let's test this. It's going to update the assistant, and you'll see this on the right-hand side. And obviously this file can be then updated by the owner of this assistant. And it's a bit of an admin process, but you'll notice under the configure part, there's our documents, there's the project status update. Okay, so let's see what it tells us. If we ask it, what is the current status of the project, and it will give us the current status. And now it's going to refer to that document, and you'll see it will clearly give us the current status. And you can ask questions around this. You don't just need to ask that specific question. You can say, what is the upcoming tasks, or do you see any issues? Or if you look at, you can really be creative in the way you ask questions on a specific document. So you'll even notice if you compare the left and the right pane, the responses are differently nuanced, because it's now considering all the instructions I gave it previously on how to output, how to keep attention, and how to be insightful.
So again, Anton, in just to summarize that little bit there, my understanding is essentially you've added to the knowledge base by bringing in that project report. And now that is part of the contextual understanding for the assistant, if you query anything that relates to status information on that report, the bot now essentially has the ability to feed back its understanding based on that content documentation that's been shared with it. Is that right?
That is correct. And I wanted to clearly demonstrate that you can add and remove this to the bot. So you don't need to have this fixed set of data. If you have data that's really flowing with status changes and how the project progresses, your bot can really handle more data. So this bot can handle a total of 20 files. So you can add a total of 20 files to the bot. So it makes it very convenient if you want to add more details, or this bot becomes more intelligent.
Good, thank you.
Great. Thank you for that, Carl. So now we're going to jump into document creation. So we all know, maybe you've created a document before, and you know that obviously I have to ask questions, and sometimes it's a bit frustrating. But in this case, I am trying to show you how to make it a little bit easier. So how do we make it a little bit easier? We have this special long prompt here. So without trying to be too complicated, this prompt just explains the process of how to interact with the user. You ask the user, if the user only says, I want to create a document, you ask it, okay, what's the purpose? Then the bot would create an outline, and the assistant would help you to delve into each section. So that's basically, it just tells the steps in a short, concise prompt to say, when you create a document, just go through these steps. And it's not really foreign. If you use AI before, you probably use this method, but you'll see here I'm trying to create a requirement document. And this, from this requirement document, it's going to create a bit of a framework for us. And now you can say, okay, let's go deeper. So I've stated the reason, I've stated the purpose of the document, so it's not going to ask me. So it's got that intelligence to say, let's delve into the framework, and it's not going to be a step-by-step thing. At the end, I'll show you a way of how to take this further if you want things to be a bit more precise. If you want to interact with clients and things like that, we'll delve into that a bit later. But this is the basic principle of document creation. So this output, you would still copy and paste into your documents. Okay. Let's jump into...
Anton, sorry, I'm just going to
Sure.
raise the question here quickly from Anthony, because it relates to what you were talking about just prior to this, which was the number of files that you can add into that knowledge base. And Anthony's question was, is that 20 files for the entire assistant's existence, or is it per session that you set up? I assume it's for the bot assistant, no matter how long it exists, yeah?
That is correct. Yes, Anthony, so it's specifically for the bot. It's not per session. You can also have in your discussion, in your conversation with the bot, you can also add files when you convene with the assistant. You don't need to think, okay, we're only stuck with 20 files now. I can't add a file if I want to ask a question about a certain file that I've added to my conversation. But the bot, creating the bot, it's only for the context of the bot, of the assistant specifically. 20 files. The limit is quite high. It's 500 megabyte for the size, so it's quite high. And if you want to add 500 megabytes of data, that will be very impressive. So I think it's sufficient for the basic, what we're trying to accomplish and what you would do with a basic assistant.
So Anthony, I think what Anton's telling you is if you want to download the entire content of the internet, just make sure you've got really good compression on that file to under 500 megs, and then no problem at all.
Yeah, they would also it will tell you if there's a problem with the content. So it has an interactive way of handling that as well. Okay, so let's get to the interesting part. So here we're going to create a flow diagram, a flow chart. You can do flow charts. You can apply this to process flow. We can be a bit more fancy and say you can do UML. You can do a sort of a risk assessment fishbone diagram. So if we want to get beyond the word salad, it can do simple things as well. And we're going to use the external tool called Draw.io. Draw.io is for free. It's free, and it is not a final solution that you would say, okay, can I use this now in my PowerPoint presentations? Sure, you can, but you need to export or copy that into your PowerPoint presentation. So it will help you in an end-to-end scenario. It will help you. Maybe you want to start something with a team. Maybe you want to have a discussion, and maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's not 100% correct, but at least you have the concepts and idea settled. But if you want to be more specific, you can also be more specific. If you have the flow perfectly laid out, you can really just talk to the assistant. But in this case, we're going to instruct the assistant to create that for us.
Well, I think these are the kind of bits that really make a difference, Anton, in terms of going, it's not just within the context of the bot itself that you can interact with it, but you can actually take content out of this and create even more informative pieces that you may need.
Exactly, and it looks a bit, it has a bit of a component here where it seems like it's coding for you, and that's okay. It's a bit of code called Mermaid, and I'm going to instruct the assistant now to say, okay, generate it for Draw.io, and use mermaid specifically. That's just over time we've learned that this is the best way to do it. Okay, you can see here it will analyze your request. It will determine, the diagram or chart. It will create the visuals using mermaid, and it will present the mermaid code for us. So I'll show you now. It's really not something to be scared of in that sense, or worried that, oh, we're coding here now. It's more a way to copy the data. So it's updating the GPT now, and then I'm going to show you the example of how to create, and it's quite impressive. So I'm keeping it generic. You can obviously, if you have interaction with your assistant after you told it to generate diagrams, you can be more precise in saying, okay, I want it this way and this way and this way. But for this example, we're just going to keep it generic. Okay, so it's going to say it's updated, and then we're going to do the example. Now we're going to ask it to create, let's just give it time to update, and we're going to ask it to create the diagram for us. So a flow diagram to show the customer interaction on the start presenting including. Just to keep it real there, yeah, even spelling mistakes are part of this. So here we go. So now it's going to do that for us. You can say below is the diagram in mermaid syntax. And there it's go. This block is, you don't need to understand what it says. This is the way it presented it to you. Obviously, when you ask that question, you can say, I want this flow. This is how customer returns is like. I wanted to show this, etc., etc. So you see that is a specific block, and it put it in a code block, so you can easily copy it. Let's jump to Draw.io. And in Draw.io, we're going to go advanced, insert advanced mermaid, and we're just going to paste that part in Draw.io. And we're just going to say insert, and it will create that diagram for us. And you'll notice there, even the returns process at the bottom. Now you can edit. With this, you can edit and you can change and things like that. Okay, I believe this is really very useful if you want to just maybe start a document, start a conversation, or start a thinking. So one thing I want to note is it can be edited or exported or copy and pasted in a document. But in your chat, if you want to say in your conversation, I don't like the return process, redo that for me, add XYZ, it will recreate the whole piece of code for you. So you just need to say select and insert the whole new part of it.
And Anton, perhaps that's just a note about the integration between your assistant and then these different tool sets, depending on that endpoint tool that you're using. That really kind of defines the output format that you need in order to make that integration happen, right? Because I know perhaps in the Excel context, I've seen that integration happen the way of VB macros that basically get pasted in. So when you were looking at this, did you work from the tool side back to GPT to know that it was mermaid, or was it something that was already defined somewhere that you could access?
No, it's actually from the tool side. You're absolutely right, Carl. It came from that side, that using Draw.io, what is an easy way to interface? But you actually raising a very important point is that the assistant or the bot can create, if you know the detail and the more advanced settings in PowerPoint or Word, you can do the VB code, ask it to generate the VB. So there's no limit to that. It just means it's an easy way to transfer between the two worlds. It makes it easier to transfer. So this is a mechanism to do that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. Carl, you mentioned Excel, and that's sometimes a challenge for us. How do I get data into Excel? So we're going to create a scenario here of a balance sheet. So this becomes a bit more, okay, now we have to be careful about security, but let's do the demonstration. I'm going to do a bit of a journal entries, and we're gonna add it to the assistant and make sure the assistant can then extract that balance sheet for us. So let's jump right in. So we're going to go back to editing the assistant, and we're going to say, okay, I'm going to attach a file for you. That's a balance sheet. So you'll notice that this is in Excel. And when you attach Excel documents, there's a small setting that you need to change in the assistant. So now you're going to go into analysis mode for the assistant. That's the balance sheet, and I ask it, if the user asks for a balance sheet, this is how it should be handled. and we're going to create the context for that specific balance sheet. Okay, and it's going to update. Okay, and this is the part where it's going to say, okay, let's tell you how I'm going to handle this. Let's just give it a moment, and you can use it.
It always gets a little more complex when Excel is involved, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit more, but it can do analysis very, on different fields, on columns. You can really have this interaction with a Excel document very detailed, and it makes it possible. So you'll notice it's updated. Now I'm just going to show you, if you have that updated, this is what the configuration looked like. So you'll see the data set there. That's all the documents, and there's the Excel document. And you'll note it says here, you have to enable the code interpreter, and I'm going to enable the code interpreter there at the bottom, and just make sure that this document, because Excel documents, as Carl said, is a bit more complicated, so you can see it's separated that as well. So okay, let's ask for a balance sheet. After it's updated, we're going to ask to extract a balance sheet, and it's gonna make sure it's in a tab delimited format as we've instructed here. Must be in a tab delimited format, and then we're going to copy and paste that output into Excel and just show you it can be very practical in that sense. So with programming and a bit more effort, the integration can be a lot more. Obviously, Copilot within Excel is also a good option for you to look at. With Microsoft releasing, I don't know how far that release is and how good that is at this stage. I've tested it a bit, but you can see it analyzed, and now it's going to extract the data, and it extracted the first 5 journal entries, and it formatted in a way that we've instructed to keep true to that Excel sheet. It's going to output it, and the trick is the tab delimited CSV format. This is the trick to Excel. It's a very small thing, but you can just say it seems very crude, but in that set of data that I selected, switching over to Excel and just pasting it in, and it will keep that for you. So you can use that whichever way you want to. It's just a way of interfacing it. Now it's not the most advanced, but it gives you that way, in a simple way, to ask your assistant how to do that. Okay, so our time is good. I want to end with a final slide. If there's no questions, Carl, you comfortable? No, in the Q&A?
Still good. Absolutely.
Still good. Great. Okay, let's move to this wrap-up. So the wrap-up says, and it shows you a screen that ChatGPT has. It's called the Assistant Playground. Now, this playground takes it to the next level. You can add code to it. You can add data structure to it. You can create a bot that is more specific. You can apply this bot to customer support and make sure it keeps on the tracks, and it's not generic as we've done the assistant now. And if you create an assistant using this mechanism, it requires a bit more experience, and we can do things like customer onboarding. We can handle complex account and product specific queries, and we also can interface this with audio. It's quite interesting. So I just wanted to show you that there's a possibility to take this further. The purpose of this session is just to break the ice on how to just get going. You can create 20 assistants for you for every task you want to do. If you want to summarize a meeting or anything like that, you can really have fun with it. There's no limit on that. And let's jump then. Are there any other questions?
Fantastic, Anton. And again, for our audience, if you do have a question for Anton, please just post that in the Q&A section, and we'll pick that up from there and put that into Anton. Anton, in the interim, clearly there is a significant link, if not the only link, between the prompt engineering that you're doing there in order to set up the bot, create the configuration, the contextual information, and then get the most out of it in terms of a directed response that you want from the assistant. Now that I know for you has come after a journey of a number of months of working with this and fine-tuning it and getting it to the point where you're confident that you can implement these things quite effectively. But for those like myself that might be new to creating an assistant, where do we start? Where's the first place that you would go in and take a look at either this content or this training material in terms of where it is before you go and play, and it might make you a bit more effective in terms of how you go about creating your first assistant?
No, that's the beauty of this. It's really accessible. And if you want to start with this process and you feel you need a bit more background, focus on the term called prompt engineering. So if you're not aware, you can go on YouTube, you can go on the internet and just search for videos that focus on prompt engineering. But what I've seen also is you get so many resources that can give you example prompts. So that is the first place, because it challenges us to ask questions. It's a very philosophical thing in that sense that you say, I have the world of information at my fingertips, but how do I ask the question? How do I phrase it? Or how, take it to the next level? How do I tell an assistant to respond to questions? So it takes it to the next level. So it's a good place to start and say, look at prompt engineering. And prompt engineering would give you that feel. And as soon as you interact with the assistant, it makes it more comfortable to create an assistant and just start off with the simple things of, I want you to do this for me. So that's a good place to start. Carl, does that answer your question?
It does. And Anton, it leads me on to my next one straight away, which would be, in your learning, what were probably the 3 big mistakes to avoid in terms of building an assistant or using ChatGPT for this purpose?
Okay, that's a good one. You're really pushing my understanding here, but that's a good one. Thank you, Carl. So the first one is that you are not giving instructions like you would when you program. It is not. You are sharing insights. You want the assistant to be insightful and construct responses, and those responses are not precise. So that's one of the things and you're going to be sparing yourself a lot of frustration if you agree that your assistant needs to be insightful in that and not specific. So many times I've seen people prompt and say, no, I don't want this, I want this. No, I don't want this and this. And that brings you to the second point. Just make sure, like in any conversation, when you have a conversation with a person, see the assistant in that same. You always create context. If I want to have a conversation with you, I would create context. We're talking about cats and dogs. Okay, so what about cats and dogs? I would like to look at the feeding habits. And what is the question? I would like to know what food to buy. So those 3 points, when you have a conversation, is context, what is the ask, and what should be given back to you. So those are the key things. The last thing I think is that you'll notice as soon as you regularly use AI, it tests your ability of asking questions. So don't be afraid to ask the big questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions where strange patterns. I've seen questions of, how would the philosophical concepts of Carl Jung relate to a motor mechanic trying to build a racing car relate? You can do things like that. It's just totally different worlds, but don't be scared to overlap context. And it works. It really does. It's amazing to see that it works.
And Anton, connected with that, are there any particular dimensions or areas that you've encountered where you go, these assistants are really not good for that? I think, as example, I've understood that in some cases, particularly the ChatGPT models, mathematical ability isn't something that you should rely on, in that simply because the models aren't trained for that kind of thing. There are other better tools for doing that. Would that be a fair example? And are there other examples that you would look at and go, don't do the following?
Yes. So I've had one example where I asked the assistant for books that would relate to delivery management. And it went on and gave me books that doesn't exist. So that's a very, very critical thing that you have to be aware of. Do not just trust the information. So this creates a murky thing that you would say, but I'm using the assistant to help me. If there's no trust, like even on a personal level, how can I trust my assistant? So that's why also we try to hone our focus on certain data and make sure it doesn't. But be aware that they call it hallucination. Hallucination is a real thing. So that's why if you are an expert in your area, it's always good to check, does this make sense, and not just trusting it flat out. And that's why it's called an assistant. So it's not your professor or your lecturer. You have to treat it as an assistant. That's very important. And yes, I love this competition that we see among AI models, and maths is the main thing. Next to coding, there's any developers on the call, you'll know the coding thing, that question that floats around on the internet. Write the snake game in one shot. And if you can see that AI can do that in one shot, then we say, oh, this is a very good AI model. But maths is still a problem. So scoring of maths is like 50-60%, but it's getting better. And another thing that AI battles a bit with is planning. So I've overcome that in a certain way where I said, okay, we want to follow this pattern. Now plan to this pattern, then it will assist you. But looking ahead and doing projections is still a bit of a, it will give a response, but you can see it needs more work. So planning is still an area where there's still work that need to be done there.
Still fun to play with, though.
Still fun to play with, yes.
And Anton, I guess the art of that, in terms of building these assistants and then sharing them with teams, have you seen efficiency come out of that for teams? Have they actually gained the benefit from utilizing tools like this?
Absolutely, Carl. It's the amount of work is so much more. It is in the end, it's a time thing. We know the importance of time and getting things done quickly is that it really helps with the time. And in my profession on the delivery side, having that first brainstorming, sitting, trying to determine what your backlog, what are the points we need to discuss, what are those items that are key, and those are the items that takes a lot of time. You can imagine if you wake up one day and you have to now look at how do we approach the project. Sure, you're doing it from an experiential perspective, but that initial brainstorming really reduces a lot. And just document creation. Just imagine you have to write this important email, and we know, it helps with email. It compresses the time so much. And if you get very creative in saying, okay, this is the way I want my emails to sound in your assistant, you can create an assistant that's only for your emails. And it's really compresses time a lot. It really expands. And people usually, oh, it's going to replace me. No, you will be more efficient. And efficiency, I think, would sum it up in the end. It's not we're going into this dimension where things are murky. It's just making us more efficient. And all the AI models are gearing towards that, making people more efficient.
And Anton, that kind of makes me think to ask this is, in terms of building an assistant, and for, say, your example of working with a project team, when you scope what you want that assistant to do you almost map it to particular roles, or is it able to cover enough detail at a number of roles? So as example, you could create an assistant that is centered around project management knowledge and the project manager, delivery, scrum master type functions versus the analyst activity or tester activity within a project team. Is it advisable to narrow the scope for an assistant, or is it still quite acceptable to go, no, I want a broad general assistant that could be valuable to multiple people within a team?
If you want an assistant to be generic, I would say then focus on the specific discipline, like an analyst or a programmer or a project manager or scrum master, if you want it to be generic. But if you want to be project specific, try to contain those roles within that assistant. You can tell the assistant, here's the list of the users, of my stakeholders, of my team members that I will be using. And you need to know who you are talking to, and you need to determine that from the conversation. This is an analyst type of, I need to provide an analyst output. In our example here, we use delivery like SAFe and Scrum, and we've added an analyst, the BA box standards to it. So I would suggest at this stage, if you want to contain it in the central data space that you want certain data, just make it very specific and distinguish the roles in the attention part of your assistant. But if you want it to be generic, say, I want a generic assist, I've got a certain way of work, I've got this transcript from a meeting, and I want a certain output, make it specifically for you. But if you have a project, I think contain it. I would like to see this feature on ChatGPT's assistant, where you can structure those and say, okay, this assistant is part of this. But then we get into an interesting space called AI agents. And AI agents help you then to refine output and sort of reflect on the output. But that's a completely different discussion. As I said, I've mentioned the assistant playground, and we can have further conversations around that if people are interested. But the playground then would define that in more detail. For this assistant, it would be a bit more beneficial to make it generic for professional and discipline use, and for project, just contain the data set within the same assistant.
Great, thanks, Anton. I think we're almost out of time for today. There was a question earlier on that related back to the choice of platform for building out the assistant. And the question from Nina was around, can you only create an assistant on the paid version?
Yes, Nina, if you want to go into the real advantage of what assistant provides, sharing data among teams and things like that, it is only on the paid version that you can do that. Maybe OpenAI would open that up for us at some stage, because it changes so quickly. All of us can see the change on a weekly basis, so maybe that'll change very quickly for us. But at this stage, that ability to share among projects and share data to get the real advantage of what this can do is only on the paid version.
Great, thank you, Anton. I don't see any further questions from our audience today. Anton, perhaps one last question for you from myself. Where to next with these assistants? What's going to come along that we should be aware of or paying attention to now?
Okay, so yes, the next phase of the evolution of this will be moving from an outside world to a world that's localized in AI, so becoming closer. And Copilot from Microsoft is trying to bridge that gap for us. So having the context aware of not only your project, but understand your way of work, understanding the way of your day, understanding the way of how you would prefer things to be done, and what your role is on your laptop, on your computer, on your phone, to be more localized and interpret that. And that assistant will then plug in on that environment. So that is the next phase. That's really exciting to see things happening around it. And when we get to that phase, it's going to be very difficult for someone that's used to AI to point and click at some stage. The next evolution, I think, this is speculative from my part, that we're going to look at your operating system, like we know Windows or whichever, Mac. It's going to be a language model. So that's going to take it to a next level where it's going to be very conversational, and it's going to really be a assistant that's local. But yeah, that's how I see it. I progress maybe sooner than we thought, but it's very exciting to see that's the direction we are going.
Well, thank you, Anton. And again, thank you for making the time available today and sharing your expertise in the space. I see you have shared your contact details there, which is great. So if anybody has particular questions for Anton, you can use that email address that is shared there on screen. That's akeyter@dvtsoftware.com. Anton does do consulting out through to our clients in terms of how they can adopt AI assistance and some of the tech that's available. It's available. It's here today. It's certainly powerful. Get a bit of guidance along your path in terms of bringing it into your organization. Anton, final words from you?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you to my team as well. You know, they put up with my, you know, almost a addiction to AI and really on this path. And thank you for creating this platform for us to share this information. And I really hope to engage with you. So if you want to ask questions or do their further engagement, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much, Carl. It was great doing this.
Thank you, Anton. And again, thank you to our audience joining us today on today's DVT Insights session. We look forward to you joining us again in the near future. This session will be recorded or is recorded and will be shared out on our usual social channels. Join us again in the near future. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.